Welcome back to another episode of Sybil After Six. I am so excited to have the amazing Angelique Johnson join me this evening. Angelique, how are you?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Thank you so much. Y'all, I happen to have met Angelique through a mutual connection that I went to college with. I'm not gonna say how many years ago, but let's just say long enough. And he said I had to meet her, and I was so excited because another woman of faith, another entrepreneur trying to do as many things as possible in our communities. And so she's got two different businesses, Memstem LLC and Visionarium. And so, Angelique, would you take just a few seconds and tell the listeners what those two businesses are and how they got started?
Yeah, sure. So my first entry point into the entrepreneurial world was in 2010, and that was with Memstim. And that's a neurological R&D company. So we do um, research on medical implants, leads that you can use in various parts of the body to replace or improve neural function. And then
Wow.
Visionarium is something that I started after MemStem, just in my own journey being a solo in terms of one of the few Black women to be in my space. Actually, the only Black woman, quite honestly, when I started to be in my space. Um, I might still be the only Black woman, only Black woman to have ever founded a, sometimes they call them neural devices or brain machine interfaces. Some people know about it now because of Neuralink. That's Elon Musk's company.
Mhm.
But I really wanted to encourage other entrepreneurs who were kind of underserved. And so I created incubators and accelerators, and that eventually became Visionarium. And our saying is that you may not yet be a millionaire, or you may be way beyond a millionaire, but everybody should desire and should receive support on how they can be their best visionaire, how they can be vision rich with the visions that God has given them for their business.
That's amazing. How did you get started in this work? A lot of the women that I've talked to have had some really, I'm going to go with interesting aha moments. One lady told me about a pigeon. Another lady said her grandmother came to her. Somebody else said like a rock hit their car and all of a sudden the vision appeared. Do you have something like that, or was yours just a smooth transition?
I heard from, the God of our Lord Jesus Christ. I'm a Christian, a pretty firm believer. And the relationship and the power relationship that we can have, with God. And, as a believer, getting access to that gift of the Holy Spirit has been invaluable to me because from a practical standpoint, I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. And initially I just thought, well, this is just something I'm gonna get some limited experience in just so I can go off and work at Boston Consulting Group or something like that. I wasn't really trying to be an entrepreneur. And I went through this training program through the University of Michigan Ross School of Business. I
Mhm.
later on was given the title of one of the top 20 entrepreneurs to have ever come out of the Zell Lurie Institute for Entrepreneurship, which was the entrepreneurial program at the University of Michigan Ross School of Business. But when I started out, I was definitely not going to be getting any honors because I was timid to get into it, and I kind of got high on my own supply. And through the pitch competitions and just the training I received there, and realized like, hey, maybe taking this entrepreneurial thing greater is a good idea. But at that point, it was still just I'm thinking just my thought. So it wasn't really until I founded the business and began to get into it that I really began to consult with God and really ask, is this what is for me? And, because I feel compelled to do it, but I also feel like I don't really want to do it either. I really just want to go work a job like everybody else. It's
Yeah.
a lot of stress, a lot of pressure, a lot of sacrifice in doing your own business. But, I kind of literally had to come to Jesus moment. And he's like, no, this is what I want you to do. And he reinforced that with a little bet I made. I told him that, hey, if I get funding, I was applying for the second time to the SBIR program. And I said, hey, if I get it this time, I'll stop questioning, this calling for this season of my life and I will just go full steam ahead. But if I don't, then, I want full freedom and reign to go, make my 300,000 a year and go do some consulting. And with my PhD in electrical engineering, I'm a doctorate. And so I have lots of options on that lane. And I actually got up off the floor. I was literally on the floor talking to God. And I got up off the floor and I felt really elated because I was like, oh, I'm never going to get this funding. And I just started looking for jobs and daydreaming about all the great things I was going to do.
Yes.
And then I ended up getting the funding. And since then, ended up raising millions. And I haven't looked back. I know no matter what happens that God led me into it.
That's amazing. One of the things that I love talking about women who, right, we've excelled, we've got the degrees. That is not this conversation, but that turning point between do I apply for a job or do I become an entrepreneur? And I watch so many women talk about how hard the job search is, and I wonder, would your job search be easier if you just started that business that you're supposed to start because you're not supposed to be looking for a job in the first place? Like, how many people would have that aha moment to say, does God really want you to be an employee somewhere else? Or does
You
he want
know,
you to carry that
I,
torch?
I probably have a very different take on that.
Yeah,
I After I started my own business, like I said, I wanted to support other entrepreneurs, particularly, I started out really wanting to support Black entrepreneurs,
yeah,
entrepreneurs that had a purpose and a calling, but no support. So
yeah,
women entrepreneurs. And but the more, I started supporting hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs through either incubators, accelerators I did, which were smaller numbers of businesses and entrepreneurs, or through going and, teaching at different universities as a guest lecturer or
yeah,
helping with different incubator programs across the nation. And after many, many years of doing this, so I started kind of my own journey back in 2010. I've
yeah,
come to the conclusion that it is very easy to get a job and that you should get a job if and unless you're 100% sure that
yes,
entrepreneurship is what you're being called to. Because I
yes,
see that a lot of entrepreneurs, they have this thought that it'll be easier to be an entrepreneur to own my job versus just going out and getting a job.
yeah,
And it is not. It's a lot of sacrifice, especially if you're doing it because God called you to it. So he's not going to make it easy as you think, because he's gonna want more out of you because there's a lot more he can do with you.
yeah,
But overall, for anybody, even if you're a non-believer, it's really hard to own your own job. And but there's jobs out there for you to get. So sometimes I've actually sent some entrepreneurs back and said, hey, you know, I'm looking at what you're passionate about. I'm looking
yeah.
at what you hate about entrepreneurship. I'm looking at what you love about it. And a job might be the lane for you. So while I am a huge champion of entrepreneurship, um, owning your own job it's rough. You can probably agree. It's another thing when you got to pay the bills off of what you eat what you kill.
Eat what you kill. That's right. You eat what you kill. Absolutely. I have sent some entrepreneurs, not sent, but like I've recommended, like, hey, this might not be the season for all of these ideas. Um, but then there are other people who I've watched apply for jobs, and I'm like, you really need to start a business. Like you don't have the temperament to work for somebody else. But we are sold the safety of a job. I was like, I don't know if either one is quite safe.
Yeah, it's not. It's interesting you say that temperament. Um, I always say a lot of entrepreneurs, they say I want to be my own boss.
Yeah,
And I don't I think if you want to be your own boss, the closest you'll ever get to being your own boss is working for somebody else.
yeah,
Because when you become an entrepreneur and start, well, you become in a way when you don't have any employees, it's like, well, I'm out here to myself. I kind of could be my own boss, depending on what you go into. Now, some consulting areas, it's not a thing. But for
yeah.
a lot of us, you don't become your own boss because you find out that, man, there's other things that have to rule me. My customer is my boss.
Correct.
So even if I'm a business of one, my customer is boss. Now, when you start hiring people, if you're doing it right, you'll come to find out that your employees are your boss.
So your
Because
boss.
if they're not happy and they're not satisfied, then you're not going to be happy and satisfied. And so I think this idea of being your own boss is something that I try to dispel because,
Yeah.
you know, ultimately God wants to be in control of our lives. And we always have that desire in our flesh to do it. But I always say it's a lot easier being your own boss when someone's paying your paycheck and you're managing a team and you don't have to worry about if the company gets
Yes.
shut down or not. And
Yeah.
I'm a bit radical in my thinking, but it comes from a very applied
Yeah.
area. That's having worked with so many entrepreneurs and seen how we need to shift our mindset and realize that we cater to those we serve. That
Yeah.
your heart really should be what's the best thing I can do for my customer, and in that regard, you're going to find yourself submitting a lot.
Yes.
And it's not going to feel like that boss lady, boss girl, boss queen, boss chick,
Yes.
that doesn't come. You probably can resonate with the times that you've had to really submit and, set aside your own things that you would want to do. Vacations, when I hired employees, I stopped going on vacations. Suddenly I felt like I had kids suddenly, and I
Yes.
was like, what happened to this life of my own?
Yes. Yeah. So I kind of got dropped into, not kind of, I got dropped into entrepreneurship as well. I was like, I really don't want to be a business owner because I had been in business before and I left being an entrepreneur and I went back to corporate because I was like, this just doesn't make sense. But I also realized God had to prune some of those bad behaviors in me so that I could be the business owner that I am today. And that did take some, stewardship of my mind. That took, definitely, like I said, pruning some of those corporate behaviors that we just fall into. Um, and really shifting me, like you said, to realize that if I was going to be successful in business, I had to lead with a servant's heart. And I thought I had it, but I didn't. I really thought I had a servant's heart, and God was like, but do you really? Because if you have a servant's heart, I saw a post, they were like, God does not care what's in your bank account if he's calling you to serve. And I've had a couple of those like, but God, you don't want your kid hungry, do you? You don't want your seed begging for bread either. So I've had both experiences, and I think that's what shapes how I show up and serve people better now because I went through that process. Um, so that's amazing. So we're dispelling the be your own boss myths. I totally agree. How have you made God the CEO of your company? There's a lot of press around, I'm the CEO of my life. And it was like, but are you though? Because I wake up and talk to God every morning, like, okay, what are we doing in your business today? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I desire that I could say that I always did that, and it's actually a more recent thing. I thought I was doing it. I thought if I woke up in the morning and I have my devotional, when I could, remember it or when I set aside time to do it, I thought if I prayed about decisions throughout the day, I thought that was making God the CEO of my business.
Yeah.
But more recently, I have really learned more about a process, that Greg Diedrich, used to be a former president within KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken, and just high-powered corporate, businessman. Um, and God got a hold of him and said, "Hey, there's another way to do this." And so he wrote a book called Building in the Spirit, and
Yeah.
I've actually been in his leadership program for the last 2 years. And it was really transformational to me because it made me realize that for God to be the CEO of my business, it wasn't about getting him, what I was doing was getting him to co-sign.
Right.
And I was depending on the grace of God because I was connected to God to steer me and get my mind right and get me moving. But it wasn't intentional, to be quite honest. I thought I was doing the intentional thing. But
Oh,
what I learned was that if I really wanted to make God the CEO, then I would go into every situation asking God, what are you looking to do here? And so, for example, when I have a meeting and the meeting is about me closing a contract, I thought God, please help me get this contract. If I didn't get the contract, I'd say, God, thank you for, preventing me from what must surely been a negative thing for me to have. You have better for me. I trust you. That was the limit of what I did. But now I go in and I realize it might not even be what it's about. It might be if I listen to the Holy Spirit might give me a word for this person. And God just wanted me to meet with them. He used a contract as bait to get me to meet with them and then to meet with me. But it's
Wow.
really about encouraging them in some other way. So now when I think of God being the CEO of my business, I'm more intentional about asking him, what are you doing?
Mhm.
And I try to tap into like, God, I don't even know the metric. You know the metric for success.
Yes.
And so you tell it to me. And so I can make sure I get a good grade on that and get some good fruit on that. And so I try to do less co-signing and less God endorsements and more like actively partnering with God. But
Yes.
it's definitely something I have to practice, like you said, daily.
Yes, that has been my experience. So when I first started this particular business, I would, okay, God, how are we serving today? But it was more of that superficial, I'm anticipating a result because I said, hey, God, how are we serving today? And God just again, like one of those things, say, okay, but do you really mean that, Sybil? And then you end up with these clients and it's like, but that's not serving at the highest level. And I could tell I wasn't. And I'm like, do I give the money back? Do I, right? So now I'm very conflicted because I'm not serving the way God told me to. Or I'm conflicted because I know I should have said the thing. Like you said, sometimes there's a word you're supposed to give somebody and I don't say the words. And
Yeah.
so now I've become a better orator and a better guardian and steward of my words because it really might be um, life or death for that other business owner.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
So thank you for that. Um, let's see here. So neither of us really wanted to be in business, but it's okay. I get it. That's a lot of women's testimonials. Um, I'm interested. You said the thing that you wanted to live on after you when we spoke was your spiritual capital. I'm
Mhm.
curious what that means because that feels a lot heavier than the three words. It's like your spiritual capital. That feels very weighty. What is that?
Yeah. So this is something that I really been working out with the Lord. And he woke me up one morning. I do a on Instagram live on my Instagram page, and I actually share it on my Facebook too, but
Yeah.
at the Visionaire, I do a Instagram live called Coffee and Prayer. And so I woke up one morning, I was preparing for my coffee and prayer. I just asked God, like, what are we talking about today? And sometimes it comes from what I thought of throughout the week and what conversations he's been having with me. And one morning he woke me up and he just dropped like spiritual capital in my mind. And I started asking him about it. And what it came to be was that he was saying that, Angelique, I have these spiritual capital resources that mimic, right? Not even mimic, but they're like the foundation of the seven capital sources that we have in the world. And so I won't get into what those seven are, but some of them is financial capital, social capital, structural capital, intellectual capital, human capital, right? And so what God told me is for every entrepreneur, and I use that word loosely because anyone who's doing a vision from God, an original vision from God, whether it's ministry or a business or an outreach effort or whatever he calls you to do, a project, it doesn't matter. You are doing something innovative and taking on risk, and that's entrepreneurship. And God
Yeah.
told me that he has a cap table for all of those endeavors, which let's take a business, for example. If you're an entrepreneur, God has a cap table, spiritual cap table for your business. And on that cap table, first and foremost, he's allowed you to come forward and be an investor. And for those who don't know, a cap table is a table that you have a chart that you have for your business that shows who owns what equity and how they brought into that equity. So maybe it has a venture capital firm and they, brought in for $2 million. It says what kind of stock they're issued. It might be a bank, or something like that. They gave you a loan-based equity situation, which are some more creative capital that's doing that. And so they ended up on your cap table, but it was a loan mechanism. So it tells you how they got on the table, how did they invest? Another, what did they put in? What money, what resources, what intellect did they put in? And how much do they own? And God, the very first investor he invites to the cap table is you. So
Wow.
my slogan is invest with God. He invites us to invest with him. But then there are people in the world who God has already shared your vision with. They have a shared vision with you. And when you come across them, it's an easy yes for them to join your cap table, your spiritual cap table, because you don't put them there, God does. And so
Yes.
there's people on my spiritual cap table for Visionarium and for my nonprofit, Spiritual Capital Inc., that I don't even know yet, but God knows them and I'm gonna come across them. And then I have other people that it's not just money that you invest with God. Some people are on my cap table because they invest faith in the business. Some people are on there because they've invested love into the business. Some people are on there because they've invested, spiritual capital in terms of, spiritual enrichment and discipleship, encouragement. So when
Right.
I think of spiritual capital, it's those treasures in heaven that we build, that we create, that God allows us to come along with him and invest in with him on. And it's what we leave behind as an eternal legacy. So I want to know, what are the treasures in heaven that I'm storing up? And I call that my spiritual capital. And the way I do it is, as an entrepreneur, is through the cap tables, the spiritual cap tables God has created, and allowed me to become an investor with.
That is okay. So there's I don't know if you've ever read the what's it called? I think it's The Law of Success. Oh gosh, what's his name? Hill. He wrote it.
I don't know if I've read that. I've heard of it,
But
but I haven't read it, I don't think.
yeah, so he talks, and so I always say, so much of secular teaching, if you just flip through the Bible just for kicks. You will see so much secular teaching that is based in biblical roots. And what you said there is exactly Napoleon Hill. Now the words are coming back to me a lot stronger here. Um, is he said, who's at your table? Now, the exercise that he outlined in that book is, oh, let me pick these people that I may or may not have ever met, or these people that may or may not still be alive, or these people that I, like to meet one day. Let me put them at my table and we're having a conversation. But what you're saying is, and it's something that I've learned as I continue to be obedient to the calling, is it's not my job to put those people at the table. God's going to reveal what those people are supposed to be doing on his behalf. And then at the appointed time, they will show up and
Yeah.
reveal themselves as to why they are at the table. And to your point, it's the easiest yes. Like you don't even have to convince them of
Yeah.
what they're doing because it's like they already knew you were going to ask in the first place.
Yeah. I use this example of I'm on a board, one of the boards I'm on, the founder sort of said the organization that I'm on that board for, had this idea, this vision God gave them. And they put together this whole proposal intending to go pitch to some, wealthy individual for millions of dollars, a very not, single digit million, double digit million. And so they put together this whole proposal. And before they could even really submit the proposal, really get the fullness of it out, it was a yes.
Yeah.
And, that doesn't mean that everything is going to come as easy as that, suddenly as that. But it's just what you said. God's already given them a vision. And they're like, I have the money, but I don't have the time and the effort to do this. God
Yeah.
already placed it on their heart. So when you show up and you're like, well, I got the time and the effort, I'm investing labor. You invest the money. Someone else is going to come along and say, I always really wanted to help those without homes. I don't have the money. I also don't have the time. But you know what? I just want to support you and rally you. And they might just encourage you and volunteer when they can volunteer, but they're like, I don't have time to build a whole organization, but I could be a volunteer. So yeah, when people have talked about spiritual capital, and you can Google it. But
Mhm.
oftentimes when they're talking about it, they really confuse spiritual capital with cultural capital, which means that they equate it to the relationships that I build in church, my biblical principles, my morals, and how I'm able to use that to make financial capital or to make build equity for myself. But I'm actually speaking truly about Holy Spirit's capital, which is God's spiritual realm and what he does actively in the spirit realm, and how we are able to just participate with that.
Yeah. That is That's so powerful. And like I said, I'm seeing it happen, which is also why we have to actively let go of things. And I know that that was one of the things God really had to work with me on is like when you say I surrender all, that means those people that you thought were going to be on the journey with you, that's a part of the surrender as well, because they are maybe are not supposed to be at that stage in the journey or that habit or those thoughts or, just so much of what you said, money habits and relationships with anything. So really to die to oneself is to be an entrepreneur. I tell people that like every day I wake up and it is not about me, then I know I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. And all those days I feel like, oh, let me apply for a job. That's me. That's not God.
I feel you.
My goodness. I'm curious, how do you balance, biblical obedience with real human ambition?
Mm, it's just what you just said. Choosing to die to yourself is
Mm.
not easy. And like I just took on a new role, helping an organization out, and I get to, in a way, although I'm part of a team, I'm given a lot of freedom.
Right.
And I say that the old me would take that freedom and use my, engineering brain and come up with wonderful, and my business brain and come up with these wonderful endeavors and initiatives that I could do. And but what I'm doing to hamper that, right? To temper
Mhm.
that is I'm actively like going and taking my plans back to God and being like, God, are these my plans or your plans? And really sitting with the Lord, steeping in him, and then just trusting and believing that God, you're not gonna withhold that knowledge from me. If I come to you sincerely and say, is this my plan or your plan? You're going to let me know. And sometimes, oftentimes, the letting me know doesn't happen in that conversation with the Lord. It happens in my interactions with people where he'll say something in the conversation, but then I'll be talking the plans out, with the team, and I'm going in one direction. And then someone on the team will say something, and I'm like, oh, that's what you meant, God, in my quiet time. Oh, that's the direction we're supposed to go in. And so it's really not just having a powwow with the Lord, a CEO board meeting with the Lord, and then getting up and like the scripture says, seeing your face in the mirror and then forget what you look like when you walk away. It's
Yes.
remembering, let me keep my spiritual ears open as I start interacting with people, because that's the hard part. When you start interacting with people and get your hands on and start doing the work, your brain just wants to lock in on getting it done. I think most women that start their own companies that become CEO founders are a bit type A, most men too. And
Right.
so your brain is already triggered to lock in and just get the work done. And I have to pull myself back. Sometimes I just shut down my laptop and I'm like, wait, let me just center on you a bit because I feel like I'm getting ahead of you, and let me pull back and slow down. That's what I've really been telling my slow down and listen for the Lord. Slow down. He can make up the time to spend a little
Yes.
bit of moment with him.
Yeah, Jesus walked everywhere. Anytime I get to Russia, was Jesus riding? No, he walked everywhere. He was he stopped and
And
smelled
then Jesus
roses.
sandals.
Right, in his Jesus sandals. He wasn't in a hurry at any given time. But we have this hurry culture that just I think is ruining businesses, to be really frank. I think we're in such a hurry to be known that we
Mm-hmm.
are ruining what God has ordained, and He's bringing us in.
It,
One final question, and it's one that I know you and I are equally very passionate about, is keeping minority businesses open.
mm.
And so remind me how many years you've been in business.
So I've been doing entrepreneurship between my two companies since 2010. I
Okay.
think I technically filed my LLC for my first for MemStim 2011.
Okay. That's awesome. and for so and to be celebrated, right? I am not taking that number lightly. And every time I hear a statistic about a woman starting a business and then that business closing in under 3 years, I just think, what does she miss? What can I do? How I can help? How can I serve? And so, what advice would you give these women who really do believe they are called into entrepreneurship? I will echo what you said. Do not start a business if you are not called to this. It's not for the faint. But these
Nope.
women who really feel called into business to shift beyond year 3 or year 5, and not that they are paycheck to paycheck or client to client, but really flourishing in business, what advice would you give them?
I would say that first figure out what aspect of entrepreneurial, where do you fit on the spiritual cap table? Because
Mm,
sometimes, most times when we get called into entrepreneurship, we think we're meant to be the CEO founder. And there are other types of entrepreneurs. You might be, I have a really good friend, and she calls herself she's a good number two. So
yeah.
she's a good chief, operations officer. She's a great legal architect. She's a great number two to the startup, but she was
Mm,
not called to be a number one. And now, does she have her own business? Yes, she does. But her sweet spot is really a number two in somebody else's endeavor. And even her own business is really almost like a fractional number two for multiple businesses. And so
yeah.
buy her time so she can be a number two, and she flourishes that. So I think at first identifying where are you in the what is your entrepreneurial masterpiece profile that God has created. Okay, now once you get past that, then it's really hard. And so I think people need to come along. That's why I'm really passionate about the work we do at Visionarium. You need support. You need to be and you need to be in a supportive community that is equipped to support you,
Yes.
and that practices kindness over niceness. So what I find is there's a lot of entrepreneur support organizations. In many cases, a lot of them are nonprofit. They have a desire to help, but they are not equipped actually to be the best advisors and the best helpers for everybody. I don't believe in guru coaching. And so you're looking for a support system, but you have to learn how to sort who's going to be a good advisor for me. Not all money is good money. What's going to be good money for me? You know, we see very high profile people that got money that maybe wasn't good money. It was a lot of money, but it wasn't good money, and now it's turning out to be a debt to their detriment. So knowing who God really has to be on your team, consulting with Him,
Yeah.
but don't do it on your own. My last piece of advice would be uh, what I just said with a double emphasis. Do not do it on your own. I
Oh,
know that I think it's over 90%, I believe, I could be wrong, but over 90% of, entrepreneurs and minority entrepreneurs, particularly Black entrepreneurs, are a business of one.
yeah.
And when you're a consultant, okay, if it's a retirement consulting, okay, you already got some stuff stocked up. I can work, I cannot work. But if you're building something that's going to be territorial, right, that's going to expand, that's going to require, multiple moving pieces, you don't, and even if you're a consultant, you don't want to do it alone. You still got a back office. So we were not meant to do it alone. God will never call you to do a business on your own. So just know He has people out there for you to connect with. Don't give up. I know it can be hard. I looked for many, many years for my support system, and it took a while, but I didn't give up faith. I just knew God has people for me.
Yeah.
And so don't isolate, and don't, you can't. You won't get money that way. Investors will not invest in you as a business of one. I'm not, if that's all you are in terms of you can be the only founder, but get yourself a team around you. Show them
Yeah.
that there's more hands on deck, and bring more hands on deck for yourself. Even if you're a nonprofit, you never want to go out there on your own, and be alone on your own. And God doesn't have that for you. So just have faith. He's going to bring the team.
That's so good. I really appreciate that. I want to echo one thing you said of this is not an alone journey, even if you're a solopreneur. That does not mean you have to pay for all of these people, right? Like my first business, I owned a bakery. I had my best friend up there whipping up frosting. I'm decorating, somebody else is like, okay, if you just, drive this cake over to the venue, I'll pay you in cookies. Like, get creative until you can compensate people. But those women surrounded me to make sure my bakery was successful. And then the same thing here. So, yeah, find those people with intention and their yeses will come because even if they don't understand the vision, they can see it because they see it in you. So I think that's so amazing. Angelique, I do want to wrap up, but before we go, how can our listeners get in touch with you for more information about Visionarium?
Yeah, so you all can find me at the Visionaire on Instagram. We also have a Visionarium page on Instagram, but I'm probably a bit more active at the Visionaire. And then you can follow Spiritual Cap Table also on Instagram. And I believe we have our YouTube up, although we haven't formally launched the podcast yet. So if you follow the Instagram, you'll get the notices for when we launch the season. We just finished filming, and so I'm excited for that. So you can find me at Spiritual Cap Table, or at the Visionaire, on Instagram. And then of course I'm on LinkedIn, Angelique Johnson there as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you joining Civil After Six. Y'all, stay tuned for another amazing episode coming soon.